I would hope that over the last 24 hours, every boy in this yeshiva took a few seconds to take a look at some of the pictures that we had up in the lobby. You guys are growing up in a generation that's all about pictures, that pictures tell a lot of stories. Try to look at those pictures and think a little bit. That's why I always ask Rabbi Farb to put those pictures up a couple of days before to give us a little bit of perspective, a little bit of thought about the horrors that our parents and grandparents went through. Great-grandparents. But you know, I really feel like Rav Vider gave a beautiful and an important twist on a very, very difficult day. Today's a very difficult day. To think about the horrors that our grandparents and great-grandparents went through, it's a difficult, difficult day for us. But Rav Vider said something very special and very important. He said that the Navi Yecheskel said that sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu causes a chilul Hashem, that God's name is desecrated, but so many people who went through it caused a kiddush Hashem. Even in the face of that kind of adversity, stayed strong, got through it, and built and ended up getting closer to Hashem as a result of it. And when I think about, first of all, Mr. and Mrs. Wahlberg, my cousins, Aaron's great-grandparents, about having gone through what they went through and then to build a family L'Shem U'Tiferes. This is what the Jewish people are about. We have difficult times. Everyone has difficult times. Very, very, very difficult times. Unspeakable times of difficulty. You heard what Rav Vider said this morning? 2 days in the Shoah, we lost as many people as Israel lost in all of its wars. Put together. 2 days. It's difficult. But we are a strong people also. To begin this morning's ceremony, we asked a number of our students to just speak very, very briefly about different aspects of the Shoah and to light a candle. We'll be lighting 6 candles in memory of those who passed away. The pasuk says, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. A candle. You know, when someone passes away, you have a yard site, so we light a candle. We light a candle to symbolize the fact that man's soul never dies. Like a candle that doesn't have any physical thing to it, it's just spirit. The wax may burn away, but the candle remains. The candle flame symbolizes those souls of those people who departed. So just a brief introduction to this morning's program. Please give your attention to your fellow students who will speak a little bit about some of the aspects of the Holocaust.
Treblinka was an extermination camp built by Nazi Germany and occupied Poland during World War II. The camp operated officially between July 3rd, 1942, and October 19th, 1943 as part of Operation Reinhard, the most deadly phase of the final solution. During this time, it is estimated that somewhere between 700,000 and 900,000 Jews were killed in its gas chambers. More Jews were killed at Treblinka than any other Nazi extermination camp apart from Auschwitz. In post-war Poland, the government purchased a large amount of land that had formed part of the camp, and a tall stone memorial was built there between 1959 and 1962. Jamaica was declared a national monument during an official ceremony held in 1964 at the site of the former gas chambers.
The Warsaw Ghetto. On October 12, 1940, the Germans decreed the establishment of a ghetto in Warsaw. The decree required all Jewish residents of Warsaw to move into a designated area, which German authorities sealed off from the rest of the city in November 1940. The ghetto was enclosed by a wall that was over 10 feet high, topped with barbed wire, and closely guarded to prevent movement between the ghetto and the rest of Warsaw. The population of the ghetto, increased by Jews compelled to move in from nearby towns, was estimated to be over 400,000. German authorities forced ghetto residents to live in an area of 1.3 square miles with an average of 7.2 persons per room. Between 1940 and mid-1942, 83,000 Jews died of starvation and disease.
Babi Yar is a ravine in the Ukrainian capital Kiev and a site of a series of massacres carried out by German forces and local collaborators during their campaign against the Soviet Union. The most notorious and the best documented of these massacres took place on September 29, 1941, wherein over 33,000 Jews were killed in a single operation. The massacre was the largest single mass killing for which the Nazi regime and its collaborators were responsible during its campaign against the Soviet Union, and considered to be the largest single massacre in the history of the Holocaust to that particular day. It is estimated that between 100,000 and 150,000 lives were taken at Babi Yar during the German occupation.
Auschwitz was a network of German Nazi concentration camps and extermination camps built and operated by Nazi Germany during World War II. Auschwitz II-Birkenau went on to become a major site of the Nazi final solution to the Jewish question. From early 1942 until 1944, transport trains delivered Jews to the camp's gas chambers from all over German-occupied Europe, where they were killed with the pesticides Zyklon B. At least 1.1 million prisoners died at Auschwitz, around 90% of them Jewish. Approximately 1 in 6 Jews killed in the Holocaust died at Auschwitz. As Soviet troops approached Auschwitz in January 1945, most of its population was evacuated and sent on a death march. The prisoners remaining in the camp were liberated on January 27, 1945. In the following decades, survivors such as Viktor Frankl and Elie Wiesel wrote memoirs of their experiences in Auschwitz, and the camp became a dominant symbol of the Holocaust.
Majdanek was a Nazi German concentration and extermination camp established on the outskirts of the city of Lublin during the German occupation of Poland in World War II. Although initially purposed for forced labor, the camp was used to kill people on an industrial scale. Majdanek remains the best preserved Nazi concentration camp of the Holocaust. 150,000 prisoners arrived at Majdanek during the 34 months of existence, and 60,000 Jews were known to be exterminated there.
Kristallnacht, also referred to as the Night of Broken Glass, was a pogrom against Jews throughout Nazi Germany and Austria in November 1938. The name Kristallnacht comes from the shards of broken glass that littered the streets after Jewish-owned stores, buildings, and synagogues had their windows smashed. The true number of Jews massacred in the attacks will probably never be known, but it's certainly many times greater than the published 91 plus dead, along with at least 300 suicides caused by the despair and endangered. Jewish deaths undoubtedly ran into the hundreds. Additionally, 30,000 were arrested and incarcerated in Nazi concentration camps. Jewish homes, hospitals, and schools were ransacked as the attackers demolished buildings with sledgehammers. Over 1,000 synagogues were burned and over 7,000 Jewish businesses destroyed or damaged.
Please give your attention to Rabbi Yehuda.
This morning, we have the great privilege to hear from Mr. and Mrs. Wahlberg, who happen to be my wife's Bobby and Zadie, my son Aaron and Gedalia's great-grandparents, as you've heard before. And we're going to hear about some of their experiences during the war. Just before I introduce them, I just want to make a few points. I remember growing up, and I only met Bobby and Zadie when I joined the family. But I remember growing up, and I remember year after year in elementary school and in high school, sitting in on Yom HaShoah programs. And year after year, we would hear from survivors who would tell their stories of the horrors and the trials and the tribulations that they went through during the war. And I just want to sensitize everybody in this room to really, really take advantage of this morning's program. Year after year, you understand it becomes more of a challenge to hear from survivors, and we really have a fantastic opportunity this morning, an amazing, amazing opportunity this morning to hear from very, 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 very special people who are going to share some of their experiences from the war. So please take advantage of this morning. After Bobby is going to speak, we're going to open up for questions, and everybody's encouraged to please ask and to interact, and please to take advantage of that. Just to help you guys appreciate how special Bobby and Zadie are, I just want to share a few very brief stories. Over the last 17 years since I've joined the family, I've had countless conversations with Bobby and Zadie about their experiences during the war. They're always open and available to talk to anybody interested in listening about the Holocaust, which is also something very unique. But like I said, I just want to share a few brief stories with you this morning just to help you appreciate how special they are. A few months ago, so we had the great zchus to have Bobby and Zadie for Shabbos. It's a little warm in here. And the conversation, it was a great conversation Friday night, and was going from topic to topic. And somehow the conversation veered to pre-war life. And my kids were asking Bobby and Zadie unbelievable questions about how life was like before the war. And they were interested in indoor plumbing. Was there indoor plumbing? There was no indoor plumbing. And they were curious just about everyday life. And I'll never forget, Bobby shared with us that one of the highlights of the fall, in the fall time, they would search for the most beautiful apple. And they would find the apple that was most beautiful, and they would wrap it, and they would store it by burying it in the ground through the cold winter, so that they could find it after the winter and use the most precious, most beautiful apple in preparation for the charoses. That was a highlight every year that they had. They would, again, select the most beautiful apple, they would take care of it, they would preserve it, they would bury it so that they would have it for charoses in preparation for Pesach. Because mitzvahs were so a part of the everyday life before the Nazis came and took away everything. There are a few legends in the family. Bobby's father, who my youngest son is privileged to be named after. So, the story goes in the family that when the Nazis came into Hungary and they closed the mikvahs, you'll hear in a few minutes, Bobby comes from a family of Vishnitsa Hasidim. Her father was a devout Vishnitsa Chassid. And part of the regular regimen, the regular routine for Bobby's father every day was to go to the mikvah. The Nazis came in, they closed all the mikvahs. That didn't stop Bobby's father. In the dead of winter, she remembers her father coming home. He found a lake near the house, and that's where he went to the mikvah. And she remembers in the dead of winter, him coming home with icicles still in his beard from the frigid waters of the lake. Unbelievable. One other very short story about Bobby's father that has survived, I believe through a cousin that survived. Bobby's family was taken to Auschwitz. Bobby herself was in Auschwitz, as you'll hear. Bobby's father found out that he was going to be gassed around Simchas Torah time. They found out that, unfortunately, their fate had been sealed. And one surviving relative told how he was so besimcha. And the people were very, very nervous, understandably, that were with him. They were very scared, they were very frightened. And they asked him, how could you be so besimcha? And he said, Simchas Torah is coming. How could you not be besimcha? Simchas Torah is coming. even though he knew, unfortunately, what was about to happen. Just this morning over coffee, as we were getting ready to come to yeshiva, Zadie shared with me how the first Friday after his aunt was liberated from Bergen-Belsen, she was frantic. What was she doing the first Friday in Bergen-Belsen? She was frantic to find a white cloth because she wanted a tablecloth for Shabbos. And she found one, and she made Shabbos, her first Shabbos after liberation in Bergen-Belsen. You're going to hear shortly about the amazing hashgacha pratis that Bobby and Zadie experienced throughout the war. I've often heard Zadie say that the Ribono Shalom literally had to turn the whole world upside down just for them to meet. Bobby comes from a Hasidic family, Zadie a little bit more of a modern family, I guess you could say, modern Orthodox family. Both families steeped in Torah, Yirah Shamayim, but they probably would not have met had the war not happened. But more amazing than the stories that you're going to hear is how they live their lives each and every day, because that's what's most inspiring to us, their family. Till today, in Kanai Nahara, in their 90s, there is still a clothing gemach that is run out of their home. Zadie starts his day each morning by attending Rabbi Willard's Daf Yomi Shir, followed by Tefillah B'Tzibur. One of my most cherished memories that I will cherish forever is Aaron Gedalia dancing with Zadie as he finished, listen carefully, as he finished his fourth cycle of the Daf Yomi in MetLife Stadium. Always with a joke and a smile on their face, they live their life for their family and for Klal Yisrael. May it be the will of the Ribono Shalom that we be inspired not only from the special stories and lessons that you are about to hear, but from the very way Bobby and Zadie lead their lives each and every day, b'simcha, and connected in a deep and beautiful way with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. At this time, I'd like to call upon Bobby to share a few words.
Thank you very much for being here, letting me speak here, especially having here my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. After Auschwitz, that's a privilege, which I love them very much. I imagine that if I ask anyone in this room about what happened in the Shoah, you would answer that 6 million Jews were killed. That means that if there were 300 people in this room, each of us would represent 20,000 souls. As overwhelming as that is, it does not even remotely represent the magnitude of the Nazis' destruction. Aside from the stories you heard about the inhumane way in which they were treated, we must remember that Hitler did not only kill 6 million of our brothers and sisters and also destroy their potential. When you imagine each of us representing 20,000 individuals, think about what each and every one of those people could have brought to the world. How many could have been great scientists, perhaps found a cure for cancer? How many great Talmidei Chacham would there be among them? And how many children could they have had that were not allowed to be born? It is pretty overwhelming, but still, it is not the whole story. Imagine when you hear about a terrorist bombing or a train crash. Understandably, the most prominent fact that stands out is the number of people who were killed. We tend to lose the sight of the fact of the tragedy on the survivors. The Boston massacre killed 4 people. But does that tell us anything about the hundreds of casualties that were physically and emotionally scarred for life, who might also never reach their true potential? You all know that 6 million Jews were killed. Can you tell me how many survived and how? I will tell you how. Each of us, myself, my husband, our sister, brothers, and relatives and friends, we survived not because we were stronger or smarter, more righteous, or even luckier. We did not survive because of a miracle. No, Each of us survived because of countless miracles that allowed us to get through another day, another hour, another breath. So that despite the atrocities we saw, and despite the horrors we suffered, we can stand here today and tell you that Hitler failed. I will share with you just one of the miracles that allowed me to be here with you today. I was born and raised in a warm, loving family in a small town called Rezavia in Romania. One of the 6 children. My father was a Vizhnitzer Chosser. My mother and he supported the family with a textile store. Their customers were both Jews and Gentiles. We were not wealthy in the way you think of riches, but we were rich in family, friends, and beautiful Torah life. My grandmother owned a lot of land, and all our aunts and uncles and cousins would gather there in the summers. One summer when I was 5 or 6 years old, I was playing in the field with a dog and shared an apple with a dog. I did not know that the dog was sick. Our doctor found a growth in my side and told my father to take me to a doctor in the city of Klausenburg immediately. The surgeon recommended an operation to save my life. Surgery in the early 1930s was not like it is today. It was a last sword when all else failed. My father was distraught and took me to Großbritannien to get a brocha from the Vizhnitzer Rebbe, who himself was ailing. The Rebbe told my father, she should have the operation, she will live. I spent months in the hospital in Klausenburg, a long way from home, but the surgery was successful. Aside from the memories of being alone and frightened and the large surgical scar on my lower left abdomen, I was fine and life continued. But within the next decade, Hitler and the Nazis started making our lives more and more difficult. The Germans made sure that we were humiliated, that we lost our businesses and jobs, that we were hungry and scared for our lives. When we were deported in the camps, the old and the young sick were immediately gassed. But then I was a skinny, scrawny teenager. My sister Rochel was older and stronger. We were stripped of our clothes and shaven and lined up either for selection to work or go to the gas chambers. My sister was on the line for work. I was not. It was difficult to recognize each other. We all looked like bald skeletons, but miraculously, in all the tumult, my sister was angrily to go back to our lines. Then one more seemingly small miracle happened. Mengel's girlfriend, who was standing next to him, began to talk to him. As he looked behind him and laughed with her, Rochel pulled me in front of her, and that second I learned the meaning. Omi yechir, omi yamus. The Rebbe's prediction came true. I had the surgery, and because of it lived and was liberated from concentration camp when the war was over. My husband came from a family that was not Hasidish like mine, but equally learned and respected in their own town. Ironically, he also had a story with a scar. Before the war broke out, my husband was 19 years old when he collapsed on the street with a stomach ulcer. He was rushed to the hospital, 2/3 of his... I thought to rush to the hospital, 2/3 of his stomach was removed. He thankfully survived, but was left with a deep scar on his abdomen. After the war broke out, all the young men were being drafted into the Hungarian army. Word was out that they were being sent to Siberia, which was a near death sentence. My husband paid paid an army doctor to infect the scar on his stomach she shouldn't be transported. His plan worked. Sadly, of the army men and his group sent to Siberia, only 11 returned alive. He too was saved by the scar. Years later, when we met in America, we learned, among other things, our scars that saved our lives were something unique that we shared. As a result of not being drafted into the army, my husband spent the war years in forced labor camp. He too can tell you countless examples of miracles that saved his life. For example, there was the time he was given leave to go home for a weekend. He was excited to spend Shabbos with his family. That even when the commander changed his mind about the weekend reprieve, he went anyway. When he returned, he was put into prison for going to war. While he was in prison, his unit was out working in the trenches and were all killed by bombings. He survives because of Shabbos. At the end of the war, the laborers were worthless to the Nazis, so the Russians were closing in and the Germans were killing as many Jews as they could. The short Nazi who was responsible for my husband's unit loaded all the Jewish laborers onto the train to Auschwitz to be gassed. When the short Nazi returned to the labor camp, the Russian prisoners who had befriended their Jewish comrades threatened him that if he did not bring their Jewish friends back, they would personally see to that when the Russian army arrived, he'd be a foot shorter than he already was. In a panic, the Nazi then backed to the train and unloaded the Jews, so that my husband survived until liberation by the Russians. I can stand here for hours with stories not only about how we died, but about how we lived. How through the worst atrocities and losses, we somehow managed not to lose our humanity and our faith. We are survivors who are, despite our physical and emotional scars, we are not maimed. Despite the fact that our families were annihilated and that we thought that we were the only Jews left in the world, we managed to rebuild and see a future and the possibility of creating homes again. I could not dream 70 years ago that I would be standing here today, just returning before Pesach from our 36th great-grandchild, bris in Las Vegas. Many of you in this room are the great-grandchildren of survivors. You are the living proof that despite Hitler's efforts, otherwise the survivors reached our greatest potential. Instead of asking why, instead of trying to comprehend the unimaginable, take my message as a charge to prove that Hitler failed. By each of you taking upon yourself the goal of reaching your own potential of greatness. Thank you. I am still proud and happy to be a Jew. And above all, I am happy to be a Torah Jew. And I hope you all understand that. Thank you.